What is it about process that we should be caring about? Why is this word and this philosophy so important to you?
For me, that's where I find the joy, the process of making something. I want to show not only my work, but also the process of making it. By showing it, encourage other people to feel that they can also make something that they can be proud of.
How do we go about finding out what photography means to us or what we want to say through photography?
Form a community around yourself with other people who are passionate about this creative craft and get some feedback on a personal level. Don't worry about, oh, that's already been done because everything's been done. You took the photo, you are the photographer, so you might as well just share it. Most of the time, people are kinder about your work than you. If you already have chosen photography as your passion right now, then what are you curious about?
The difference between starting and beginning, the fine line that might be the difference or the differentiator between one or the other.
You can also just actually take the first step, go outside and just begin, just start. Then you will learn what you need more than doing all the research beforehand and planning and setting things up.
How do you advise people in terms of where to start? Welcome to the Mood Podcast, uncovering the art of conversation through the lens of photography and creativity, one frame at a time. I'm your host, Matt Jacob. Thanks so much for joining me again. And my guest today is Wesley Verhoeve, a photographer, writer, mentor, and improvisational comedy performer whose work is grounded in attention, curiosity, and process. Wesley's practice resists speed and spectacle, instead favoring noticing, returning, and allowing ideas to unfold over time. Alongside his photographic work, he writes extensively once per week on Substack about process, always sharing his own thoughts as well as others on how to improve people's processes and craft. He focuses on discussions surrounding creativity, learning, and the lived realities of making work, and has guided countless photographers through mentorship with an emphasis on clarity, patience, process, of course, and self-trust. In my chat with him, we talk about process as a way of thinking rather than a system to optimize, about writing and publishing as extensions of photographic seeing, and about his books, Notice and Notice Journal 1, as quiet, deliberate counterpoints to trend-driven culture. We explore ADHD and time blindness as creative conditions rather than limitations, the difference between starting and beginning, one of my favorite topics, how improvisational comedy has reshaped his relationship to uncertainty, and what it means to remain a human photographer in an era increasingly shaped by expectations, consumerism, distractions, and automation. So now, I bring you Wesley Verhoeve. Okay, Wesley Verhoeve. Welcome to the Mood Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Wesley, I've been a follower and a fan for a long time. We're going to get into kind of the multidisciplinary artistic outlets that you bring to the world, bring to us as an audience. One thing in all of my kind of time, at least knowing you from afar, and this kind of plays into your Substack, is it's called process, right? And this word process keeps coming up everywhere I look with you and your wonderful work, as well as your wonderful writing and the way you just talk about photography. So let's start there. This word process appears everywhere, right, in your world, from photography to newsletter. So what is it about process that we should be caring about? Why is this word and this philosophy so important to you?
For me, that's where I find the joy, the process of making something. And I think in the past, photography, as many other creative disciplines, especially on a professional level, have been somewhat opaque and mysterious and through that intimidating for people. And I want to show not only my work, but also the process of making it so that I can, by showing it, encourage other people to feel that they can also make something that they can be proud of, whether it's their first little zine or a photography project or a writing project. So show the process so that people can see all the steps that it takes, and each individual step being absolutely possible for anyone else to do as well. So demystifying photography as an industry, as a craft, is kind of part of why I do that.
Do you feel like this is a common theme, or certainly was when you were learning photography? And if so, now, like if you can give us a bit of a background, I guess, into how you started with photography and when this kind of opportunity, but kind of problem that you saw with, I guess, gatekeeping and not quite seeing the process of so many of inspirations out there. How did that all begin in photography for you?
Well, I was spoiled because my father's a photographer. So for me, there was nothing that was ever really gate kept in that sense. I grew up playing with my Legos in the red light of the dark room at my parents' house. So it was all right there in front of me, and it was more of an osmosis process than it was a educational process. I wasn't formally trained as a photographer. Um, and so I didn't really ever have to deal with it. But as I entered into the world and became a professional myself, I did notice so many other people who had so many questions and were frustrated with the fact that it was so hard to find out. And of course, you can go take a course, or you can go to photography school even, or art school, and there's value to that as well. But I thought, um, since I was self-taught, why not show how I got to the things that I make?
So if you, or when you speak to budding photographers now, where do you advise them to start? Is it kind of the self-taught route, with YouTube and workshops and books, or is it more of a formal education that you might recommend?
It really depends. Like I think there is value to a formal education, but um it's it's not relevant for everyone. I think learning on the job is the best kind of learning, and so if you're passionate about photography or filmmaking or writing or whatever the creative outlet is that you'd like to get better at, I think my main advice is to just make and share and make and share. And so I've done quite a few talks about this piece of advice that I got from Corrine Simpson. She's a friend and mentor of mine, and she gave me this advice when I was already doing it, but I hadn't really been able to put it into words the way that she did. And so she said, self-assign. Don't wait for people to hire you to do a portrait shoot of the local sports teams or whatever the thing is that you're interested in. Self-assign. Decide for yourself. That's what I want to do. Approach the people that you want to photograph, or if it's not people, the subject, and then just do it. And you're going to be learning a lot more from actually doing it. And maybe it's not going to be the best thing of all time the first time you do it, but that is where you start.
Yeah, interesting. You actually coupled the making part with the sharing part, and I think that's overlooked quite a lot in photography. And people get scared about making photography, but when you start adding in kind of the public side of it, like, well, you need to go and share this to kind of complete that feedback loop. There becomes a completely different type of intimidation. But it's interesting you mentioned it, because surely that's an extremely part of the learning process, right?
Yeah, and I think that younger generations are probably much more comfortable with sharing because it's just part of their DNA. But there is this generation between, let's say, us and them, where maybe there was more hesitation or shyness. And of course, there are still a lot of people. When I do these one-on-one mentor sessions, and most of the time, I would say, one of the things that comes up is that I have to give them or I'm able to give them some sort of validation that it's worth sharing, because sometimes people are nervous and they might say like, yeah, but I'm not, I can't really approach these people, or I can't really share this because I'm not really a quote unquote real photographer. And then I have to free them of that notion, because that's of course not true. You took the photo, you are the photographer, so you might as well just share it. Unless you don't like what you made, of course, then that's a different story. But it's yeah, share it. It's also, I think one thing that's quite helpful is to switch your perspective, that this only really goes for photos of people. But if you took photos of a specific community or a specific person, than putting it out there. Instead of thinking of it as like, I'm putting my work out there, what you could do is you could think of like, this is a very special person that I'm interested in, and I want the rest of the world to know about them as well. So it's not about me, the photographer, it's about this person that I photographed who I find inspiring or beautiful or whatever the word might be that comes up. And it's often a lot easier to be supportive of others and shine a light on others than it is for us to shine a light on ourselves, because that can feel awkward or too much, or
So, I mean, how do you advise people in terms of where to start then? Because imposter syndrome is a real thing. And you say, well, what if you don't like your work? Well, I'd say the majority of amateurs or learning photographers, even professionals, I mean, a lot of them don't like their work, right? So, how do you break down those barriers?
Well, I mean, I would I would be hard pressed to find someone who's been doing it at least for a while that still doesn't like their work. There's got to be a photo in there that you like, so then just share that one. And also form a community around yourself with other people who are passionate about this creative craft, and get some feedback just on a personal level, like, hey, I just did this shit. What do you think? Which one is speaking to you? And that can also build up confidence, because most of the time people are kinder about your work than you are about your own work. And they
Yeah.
see things that are perhaps muddled in your view, and they see clearly like, oh, that's a really nice photo because the emotion from this photo is really reaching me. And you who took the photo might see like, oh, the crop is bad, or the whatever, the lighting is not ideal, but that's not always the most important thing. So getting some other opinions in there from just friends, that they can be other photographers or hobbyists, but they can also just be friends.
Yeah, I love that, because when you say the word share, it's so synonymous with social media that you think, oh, well, I've got to post it. I said, no, there's many other ways of sharing, like you said, with those people in your closer circle or within a community. And there are many photography clubs out there, even online forums and stuff like that, where you're going to trust, because they have a vested interest. They're in the same private community as you might be, whether it's in person or online. It's not just this stupid public square where you have the risk of getting trolled all the time. Um, and that's really important. Like we have a book club that we run every other week, and part of that is photo critique. Someone will put their work up, and it's incredible even how me these days still have my blinkers on, and not that's just the way humans are built. Is the power of someone else's perspective on someone else's work, even for the observers as well, to sit there and go, oh yeah, I didn't even think about it from that perspective, or I didn't even try and understand it from that person's viewpoint and how it's making them feel. That's extremely powerful that you'll never get on an Instagram post, right?
No, no, it's true. And it's also just the more human approach. Like the amount of time that people take to look at a photo on Instagram is like a fraction of a second. It's like and that's not really an ideal way to see any form of art or culture. So having something printed or just projected, perhaps if that's maybe how you do it for the book club, like take a moment. It's not a flash. It's still.
That's why I love photo books. And speaking of photo books, it's a beautiful segue you let us into. Um, The Notice book, your first book, I'm holding this up to the screen, but for people listening, obviously they'll have links in the description, and then Notice Journal Volume 1. And we're obviously not going to like go through these books, but first of all, before I ask you any questions about the book, when I got the Notice book, I had this lovely little note, which I'll
Oh yeah.
probably put a screenshot. And this is what I love about you, Wesley, is just the lovely little personal touches, because it just shows that you are engaged with your community and with your audience, which means so much, obviously, to people who want to engage with you and your work. Dear Matt, I hope you enjoy these books, plus some freebies for your visual pleasure. So over delivering. Warm regards from Amsterdam. So I love that. Thank you. Um, Notice. So we talked about you mentioned really kind of understanding and observing and being quiet with your work. And that kind of really comes through in this book. And I know kind of the time that you created this, which I believe was in or around COVID, probably had a lot to do with that. But if you can, just give us an overview of this book, how it came about, and what the kind of the concept behind it is.
Yeah, I created the work in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, where I was for the first 5 months of the pandemic. Um, I was at the time doing a nomadic thing where every 3 months I moved to a different city in the world. So Buenos Aires, Tokyo, Mexico City, things like that. And then city number 9 was Vancouver. And so it was going to be 3 months. But after 1 month, COVID happened. And so my house, my stuff lived in New York because that's where I lived for a very long time. And at the time I still did. But then when COVID happened, New York was a very bad place because of how many people were stuck on top of each other. So it was very unwise to go back to New York at that moment. So instead of doing that, I just kept extending the Airbnb that I was in for that what was supposed to be 3 month period, and it ended up being almost 6 months because COVID took a lot longer than originally was anticipated. And so this work was made in one relatively small neighborhood of Vancouver, a suburb really of Vancouver. And it was made as the process was that I am very attached to routine. I'm someone who has ADHD, and so what's helpful for me to keep myself steady is certain routines in my day. And because COVID, there was nothing that I could do. I wasn't allowed to work in Canada. There were no jobs to begin with, and what could I do to hold on to for my sanity, for my creativity? I thought, okay, well, I'll just go on a very long 10K photo walk every day in this little neighborhood because
10K.
that's the only place I could walk because I didn't have a car. There was no bus. Everything was closed. So it was just this little area. And having done that for so long, I did it. And in the end, I did it for 123 days in a row. And I always did it around the same time of day, when the light was the most harsh. And I walked all these streets and alleys. And because it was over such a long period of time, I also was able to be much more closely in touch with just the season and nature. And I would walk by this one part where there were certain flowers earlier on, and then a few weeks later, those flowers were gone and other flowers had come up because that's how nature works in seasons, because it was springtime. And I got to really feel very close to like the earth, if you will, because I could see all these things very slowly changing. And I was photographing in a way that was completely different from what I was used to as well. Previous to that moment, my go-to was I go to a very big, busy city. I go to the busiest part. I run around really fast and I find interesting people that speak to me. And then we have a conversation. I take their portrait. We form a connection, and then I go on. In this case, none of that was possible. There were no people on the street. There was no busyness because I was in a suburb. I was in what essentially, in my mind, previously would have been the most boring place I could have been for my photography. But through this routine, through this daily walk, through this slowing myself down and really focusing on paying attention to the little bits of beauty and wonder that I usually would have rushed right past. The name of the book is Notice, because I started noticing these things that I would have usually not noticed. I wouldn't have taken the time to notice. And in that process, I really taught myself a new way to see, a new way to photograph that I was able to then take with me post-COVID into other forms of photography. And that body of work. It wasn't set out to be a book, of course, because I didn't even know how long this was going to take. But after a few weeks, I thought, oh, maybe some of these are pretty cool. Maybe some of these could be a print, because I don't have any income right now. I need to sell something to make some money. And then a few weeks later, I thought, well, I've done this long enough. Maybe this could be a little zine. And in the end, when I shipped off Lord knows how many rolls of film to my lab. I thought, I think there could be a book in here. And I ended up making a book with my friend Dan Rubin as a designer. Yeah, that's how this book came about. So it's culled down to about 120 photos from about a body of work of 35,000 photos.
Wow, 35,000. Yeah, it certainly makes me want to notice more. And
That's
I
the hope
think,
that I have. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's definitely mission accomplished in that respect. How did it really change you as a person? You talked about your ADHD and um, that part of your life in COVID must have been. I mean, it was unnerving for everyone, of course. But if you have a condition like ADHD, it must have kind of amplified what to do, right? And how to keep focus and how to kind of train that attention.
No, actually, I thought I loved it.
Oh, you loved it. Okay.
Yeah. What I didn't love was no money and my little bit of savings going down, 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 down until it was gone. Didn't love that. Everything else, loved it. There was no social obligations. It was just a daily routine of making, 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 and then coming home, writing. And it was a very pleasant process for me. Again, I would prefer not having zero income, but other than that, I actually really liked it because it was so calming because everything I did was something calm. I wasn't running around. I was walking slowly. I wasn't like rushed. I was paying attention to everything. So for me, it was actually quite lovely in that sense.
Yeah, sounds really lovely. Apart from obviously the kind of existential worries that you had hanging over your head. But why the harsh light? Was that was sounded like an intentional decision?
Yeah, I just like harsh light. I like the challenge of harsh light, and I like how it brings out the contrast. Um, that helps with noticing certain things. So the way I photograph is that I see I think in and I see shapes more so than specific details, and so having harsh light creates many more shapes and lines.
And this book, if you're looking just before the foreword, is dedicated to your father, who you say taught you how to see. I presume, kind of in that photographic sense, and kind of teaching you photography. What was that relationship with him like in those early years when it came down to the dark room and learning these skills?
Yeah, it was just like when you're a little boy and your father does something, then you're probably going to think it's pretty cool. And my father is a very generous person, and also by trade a teacher. So it's as is my mother, and so it's just a very natural passion of his that became a passion of mine. And as children, I have a younger sister as well. And as children, basically on weekends, what we would do is we would either go to the forest or we would go to an art thing. And our house was full of books, art books. And so it was just a very normal part of growing up in this family. And his father was a painter, art painter. So it's kind of just family business in a sense.
Yeah, I love it. I'm envious. And then came Notice Journal, Volume 1, which was a few years later, which you also kindly signed and wrote a message for me. Dear Matt, I hope this book brings you calm and inspiration. Warmly, Wesley. So tell me about the calm and inspiration and again, kind of the concept. I mean, this is created differently. I mean, you've got half frame shots, everything's a diptych, and there's a completely kind of different concept to this materially as well with the book. So kind of give us some context surrounding those types of
Well,
decisions.
when I was in the editing phase of the first book, Notice, I, one of the ways that I like to work is I like to print out a lot of small prints of my favorites and then put them on the floor and see like what the narrative is that I'm kind of like getting at it at. And I noticed um, that there were so many photos in that first body of work that were, I call them echoes of each other. And so that can be, I already mentioned, I think in shape. So a lot of the time there's photos that are not of the same thing, but they have the same shape. And you'll see if you look at Notice now, every it's one individual photo next to a white page, followed by 7 pairs. So the left image, right image is a pair, and those pairs came together in the edit. And sometimes the pairing is quite obvious. It's like a very specific shape that you see again in the other photo, but sometimes it's more poetic, if you will. And so the process of doing that was so joyful. It was so fun to discover these links between photos that were taken weeks apart on a different camera, with no intention of matching. I loved it so much that I wanted to dive deeper into this idea of diptychs for the next book. So I shot it on half frame. So all the diptychs. So for people who don't know the word, that just means that there's 2 images side by side. Instead of it being 2 random images that I put next to each other in the edit, the whole following book was all in camera. So all of these diptychs were shot in the camera. So there's no changing it around afterwards, which was I'm a big fan of creative limitations. And this was a big one. And I thought, oh, this is so fun to do. And so I shot a ton of work for that too, because of course I'm not paying attention to which frame I'm on. So it's not like I'm intentionally shooting them to be next to each other, because it's almost impossible to do that, because I don't really know, it's an analog camera. I don't know what frame is the first frame, because it's, you can whine all you want, but it sometimes you end up starting at a half, sometimes you end up starting with a full. So then the discovery joy was afterwards getting the scans back from my lab, Carmencita, and seeing like, oh, wow, look at this pair that happened, And so I was able to lean much more into instinct and chance rather than intentional editing.
Yeah, and honestly, I love in terms of kind of the aesthetics. I think they're all black and white in this one, whereas you had a few color ones in. But I love the overscans on, the borders. Just add kind of the texture and a kind of real nostalgic feel to the diptychs. Yeah, I love it. I think it's really what a challenge. I mean, anyone listening, that's a challenge for you. Go and do that. I certainly won't be attempting it. The book-wise is something that I believe you're still working on. I think most established photographers want to kind of continue putting their work. It's a way of sharing as well as potentially a way of making money, depending on which side of the fence you sit on with publishing. But you working on anything at the moment, like a next book? I mean, this was what I noticed. Journal one was a year ago. Was it last year?
It was November of last year. Yes. And yeah, right now I'm working on a next book. I also have this ebook series that I do that is more related to my newsletter process. And so those are more workbooks. So actually on Sunday, the 4th volume of the process workbook series comes out. And that volume is usually the first 3 have been about prompts and challenges that photographers can take and kind of like free themselves of their own kind of like mind just to make rather than think. This next one that comes out on Sunday is actually a distillation of my personal process that I've refined over the last 10 years for reviewing my past year and setting goals for my following year. So that comes out on Sunday. Quite excited about that because I've been doing it myself for 10 years and I get so much out of it, and there were people that were interested, and so I turned it into kind of a simplified system that anyone can do.
Great. Well, watch out for that. But this episode will go out after that. So just for date-wise, 21st of December, that would have come out.
It doesn't really matter when you start. Okay. That's also part of the book. Yeah. Like, you don't have to start on January 1st. It's just for the coming year and the previous year. It's, we make our own rules. So if you want to do it from March 1st to March 1st, that also works. There's no difference really.
Okay. And where can people find this?
That will be just on my web shop on wesley.co or through the newsletter. You can find it there too. If you're a member, if you're a paying member of the newsletter, it's actually a perk that comes to you for free. And if you're not a paying member, you can just buy it as a standalone piece.
Okay, cool. And the photo book you're working on at the moment?
Oh, the next photo book that I'm working on is also diptychs, also shot on half frame. This time black and white as well as color. and that I photographed this past summer in Ukraine. And I'm very, very excited about this work. I think it's um, my most meaningful and interesting work yet, and I'm very excited to get it into a book shape. It's not about war. It's there's no violence. There's no destruction or anything like that. It is about the beauty and the power that lays in the persistence of regular life during war. So it's more about family rituals and everyday life that happens to be happening during war, and therefore it's a form of resistance. But there's no, guns or destruction that is visible in these photos.
Wow, fascinating. We look forward to seeing that. How do you even, for those that are interested in a project like that, which sounds an extremely kind of interesting take on that part of that region of the world, how do you even go about kind of ideation and drawing out the concept for this, and even logistics like setting this up? And do you have guides and people on the ground that help you, or is it just you go to Ukraine, you land, you walk around and see what you find?
No, no. No. Once again, I'm spoiled because of personal connections, but I think the lesson here is really um, actually. Let me tell this story. There's a movie that I love that really speaks to this. There's this movie director called Robert Rodriguez, and maybe people know him. He's done some work with Quentin Tarantino. I think From Dusk Till Dawn might have been one of his movies, but don't quote me on that. But he's a very interesting independent movie director who's also done some big films. And he said that the way him and his friends made their first films was that they made a list of the things that they had access to. They had a friend with a restaurant. They had a friend with a bus, whatever. And then they looked at what they had, and then based on that made something, rather than having some grand plan and then trying to see if they can get all the things that they need to do the project. They just looked at what they had. And in the case of my first book, Notice, well, what I had was a pandemic and nothing to do, and a beautiful, quiet / boring neighborhood that I needed to like get something out of. What I had with the second book, the volume 1 that you have there, is there I was going through major life changes. I moved continents. I moved to Amsterdam during the beginning of this book, and I had a major romantic relationship end. So there was a lot going on for me. And so that book, where the first book was perhaps, let's say, meditation, the second book was more therapy for myself. So that was me walking around this new city, new to me city, Amsterdam, and processing my feelings, processing these big life changes. And the work that I made reflects that, but not literally. It's like my brain in that state and what it notices, and that's what I'm documenting. For this next book in Ukraine, my partner is from Ukraine. So I had all the access that one could wish for, and everybody was very kind about it. So there wasn't it's what I had, and that's what I'm working with, you know?
Great lesson for people who kind of can overthink photography too much. Well, I was talking with Jesse Lenz on the pod the other day, and he was, saying something similar in terms of just use what you have. There's magic all around you. Wherever you might be, you don't have to get on a plane to go to some magical destination. There is magic in life. You've just got to notice without kind of, excuse the pun. And what he looks for in artists, and I'm sure you might resonate with this, but when he's looking at other artists to potentially publish, he talks about spotting the artists that are obsessed with life and just happen to have a camera on them to try and document it in their own expressive way, rather than trying to create that obsession out of photography and then trying to fit a story or something into the camera that way. And I think that was a really kind of important eye opener for me. And it sounds like that's kind of exactly what you've done with Ukraine. You have this kind of obsession with just these noticing, and I can't help but use that word because it's right in front of me, but noticing and observing these little, not little things, but these kind of nuanced areas of life that often get overlooked, or in potentially this case, Ukraine, overlooked or not really aware of or forgotten about, right? We always focus on the kind of the dramatic and front end side of things without looking at those more quiet, introspective areas of whatever's left behind, or the small things that we forget to notice and observe in the hustle and bustle of daily life. So that was really, really excited to hear about that project. When do you plan on getting that book out there into
I,
the
I'm
to the
not. I
domain?
haven't picked the date yet, but I'm thinking it. I might wait till fall, like September or something. I could do it sooner, but there are reasons why that might be a better time for it. Um, I want to add one more thing. That I think it speaks to what you were just saying. That might also be valuable. Is you already mentioned overthinking, and I think that's something that I think if we can generalize, most people who are really into photography as a hobby and also as a job tend to be on the introspective end, on the more perhaps introverted even end, and so we have a tendency to overthink, and especially when we start comparing ourselves to others who are further ahead in that journey. And I think it's good to point out that for all three of those books that I mentioned, there was no plan. I was not making a book. I was following my curiosity. I was observing and documenting and capturing, but that's a way for me to be in the moment. It's a way for me to notice things, because without a camera, I might be dreaming off. And so none of these projects start as I'm going to make a book about whatever. It's just that I'm making this work, and sometimes the work tells me that it wants to be a book after I've made it. It's not like I plan to do a project and then think ahead, like what should I get, what would make it a good book. I don't work like that. Maybe some people do, but I think most people don't. I think it prevents you, like that kind of thinking prevents you from really being in the moment and following your curiosity, because then you're looking for something that you've imagined already, rather than paying attention to what there is in front of you.
Yeah, 100%. I think most, I think that the top echelons who have got potentially commercial, not pressure, but maybe some incentives there that will kind of push some stuff out or go and create for the purpose of selling a book or exhibiting something. But yeah, I think the majority of us don't really know what we're making. And that's the beauty of the edit as well. And I think we often overlook the power of an edit, where we look back at photos from 2, 3, 4 years ago, or just a few months ago, whatever. And we have that different perspective. Then we start, like you did with your books, like we start aligning, we start seeing patterns and rhythm, and then something starts to emerge. Oh, there might actually be something here. So I think it can give people faith rather than just thinking I'm walking around aimlessly, not really knowing what I'm doing. But speaking of a bit more structure and planning, your writing career and the huge presence and the, I guess, the beautiful chain of articles and creative writing that you've done on Substack. And I'm not sure before Substack existed, but this kind of is more form based and it's more narrative based, I guess. When you seem to write as deeply as you photograph, which obviously makes sense, but how has your experience with books and photographs helped or influenced your relationship with writing, or is it kind of the other way around? I imagine photography came first.
Yes, I think it did come first, but in the end, it's all the same. It's telling a story, right? And so whether you're writing or making a film or taking a photo, you're telling a story. And so for me, the newsletter and newsletter is such a weird word, because it's not like I'm sending out news. It's like it's about the process of photography and the process of the work, and how it happens and why and all that kind of stuff. And so for me, writing it down, number one, my mission to demystify the craft and the business of photography is helped by doing the newsletter. Number two, it helps me crystallize my thoughts and realize certain things that if they're just in my head, they're more vague. So if I write them down, it becomes more clear to myself as well. And number three, it's also so much more fun in terms of building a relationship with people who appreciate my work, because it's a very different time investment. I put a lot of time into it, and they're not super short newsletters. So you have to also put a little bit of time into reading it, and it comes out once a week. Obviously, you don't have to read each one of them, but most people, I think, do. And then you have a much more rich relationship between yourself and the people who appreciate the work, because they know more, and I get to know more about them too, because I get lots of notes from readers with personal things, or whether it's about the craft or just their life, and it's just so much more rich and human of an experience in terms of like making and sharing work than social media is.
100%. Well, how if you could put your finger on what's worked, then I mean, if you look at the stats, you have over 12,000. I mean, I think you've got more than that now. Over 50, I think
19 now.
50,000. 19. Tell me the secret. 90,000 people over however many hundreds of countries.
145 countries.
145.
I just had the right. I just looked this up for someone, so I happen to know it.
You know it off by heart every day. I love it. 19,000 people over 145 countries read your. Let's call them newsletters, your Substack articles. What do you think you've done right, and what do you think people resonate with most about what stories you're telling, what insights you're giving?
I think they always say that consistency is really important, and my newsletter comes out every Sunday morning, and it is a consistent habit for me. Also because I can't really do things a little bit. I have to. If I don't do it weekly, it becomes very difficult for me to do it because I'm not in the rhythm. And I think what people appreciate about it, I know that people appreciate getting that little bit of lifting of the veil and getting to see like just the basics of how things come together, and I've gotten a lot of really sweet notes from people that said that reading the newsletter partially is educational, but it's also partially empowering, because they feel, and this is my whole goal, they feel, you know what, I can also do something like this, even if it's like maybe not a fancy linen-bound hardcover photo book, but I can make a little zine, and I show all the steps, and I, basically there's like three parts to most newsletters for me. It's like, here's something I made, number one. Here's how I made it, number two. And then the quietly screamed part is, and you can do it too. That's the whole idea. I don't say it like that, but that's in every part of the newsletter, that, if you would like to do a photo series about people that you find interesting, or if you would like to make something printed, whether it's on the wall or a little book or a little zine for cheap, here's how to do it. Go ahead. Do it. And so I've gotten quite a few books in the mail, or zines or prints, from people who said, hey, thanks so much. I was inspired by you to do this thing, and I was nervous about it, but now I did it and now I like it,
I love that. And that again, that feedback loop, it's almost sharing your thoughts and tips and what you've learned along the way, and having that come back to you in that sense of, because I get the odd message here and there as well, just from podcasts, and it means the world. And I'm sure it's extremely fulfilling to you on a larger scale, but it's not the reason one does it, I guess. But to know that you've reached people and helped people, it's extremely gratifying, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And it keeps you going, because it's like I said, I'm sure for you as well, a lot of time goes into it, and it's not necessarily like economically smart in that sense. But if people get a lot out of it, and hopefully also enough people sign up to be a paying news member so that it can keep going, those messages, even if someone can't financially contribute, those messages mean the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And where does the ideation come from? Do you kind of you plan this way ahead of time in terms of what topics and what you're going to write about each week? Because if you're committing to every Sunday, that's I know how much work it is. So what's your process? Talk to me about your process.
Well, I'm just writing about what I'm doing, so it's not like
Okay.
sometimes things are planned out because I have a plan to make a certain project a certain time or a particular kind of shoot. But sometimes I just write it the week, like the day before, because I was too busy that week, but there was something that I wanted to share. So I've been doing this for a long time, so there's always something that I can write about or share. And I've been a full-time photographer professionally now for probably about 10 years. And before that, I worked in music, so I worked in the arts as well. So there's still like lessons from then that I can still pass on as well. And so this week will be issue 224 of the newsletter, and it's been 50 issues this year. I'm taking Christmas off. I can always say more,
Yeah. And how was the looking back on, I guess, 224 issues? How's this? Do you feel impacted you as a photographer purely on the photography side? And it must have helped in some sense, but how specifically?
Like on a creative level, you mean, or?
Yeah, I guess just being a better photographer has this endeavor of being a writer every week. What has it taught you or helped you with in terms of photography?
I think it's what I said earlier, which is like by writing it down, it becomes more clear to myself. And I also pay attention to things in a different way now, because I know that if I'm learning a little lesson here and there at a shoot, I would like to pass that on. So I guess it's led to me being more intentional with my documentation and more observant with what I'm working on.
Yeah, it's one of those, I can't remember where I read it, but does writing help you see, or do you write to understand what you've seen? And usually we fall on kind of one of those sides of the question. But there was one article, I've read many of yours, but there was something that I don't know, it must have been this year sometime, but it was the starting versus beginning. And this was something because I speak to a lot of, I guess, beginner photographers, but people who are, I guess, doing it in an amateur fashion or as a hobby and want to kind of just get better or take it further or potentially explore ways to, I guess, take it commercially or to find some kind of profession in it. And this thing of like starting and beginning, the difference between that really kind of hit home for me. And the difference between starting and beginning, exactly the fine line that might be the difference or the differentiator between one or the other. Can you kind of can you remember? I'm sure you remember writing it, but can you explain this concept for us? Because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I think there is the easiest way to think about it is that we can get a bit too much in our heads, which we've said a few times now already, because it's extremely true. And so there's a difference between thinking about starting to run and buying the best, like doing the research to get the best running shoe and finding like the best coach or whatever. Like that's one thing, but you can also just do it. You can also just actually take the first step, go outside on whatever running shoes you have right now, and just begin. Just start, and then you will learn what you need more than doing all the research beforehand and planning and setting things up, and that's kind of like, not to use a marketing slogan from a shoe company, but it's just do it. Like just go ahead and do the thing, and then learn as you go. Pay attention. Change things. Like, you don't need the most expensive camera. Whatever camera you have, even if it's your phone, just start. And then you learn, and then you also learn more about what you want and what you need. And maybe in your mind, you've seen all these videos about the Pentax 672, and you're like, yeah, that's the camera I want. But if you start saving up for that, you might discover later that you're more of a, viewfinder down below kind of person, and you should have gotten the RZ. You could have discovered that by just doing it, rather than thinking about it.
Pentax 67. Well, the RZ 67 and the Pentax, both beautiful, beautiful cameras. But yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with starting those. But do you think this is a generational thing these days with being, I guess, distracted with, or I guess living in a life of abundance, right? Certainly in Western culture, we can just basically get anything we want if we can afford it. Is order in, stream anything we want, shop for anything we want at the click of a button. Do you think then this is kind of a generational thing that we've seen where we're almost addicted to starting things rather than actually like new ideas, new tools without ever actually beginning? Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It sounds plausible. I know that I have a lot of teachers in my family and friend group, and I do hear often these days that there is more fear to be to not be perfect, or like to be ridiculed, or to be bullied, or and that will make you clam up and not just loosely try things, because in your mind, if you put something on the internet, all of a sudden people might say something mean, which is totally true, unfortunately. And hard to deal with, I imagine, when you're 14. I mean, it's hard to deal with when you're 50. But especially when you're so vulnerable and young still. So, I mean, it sounds plausible to me. I could see that.
Yeah. When we think about trends then, and kind of like this uh starting things without actually like beginning things, and throwing in social media and the social pressures we have, especially as youngsters, how does anyone kind of navigate that to, I don't want to throw in a cliche like finding one's voice, but how do we go about kind of finding out what photography means to us, or what we want to say, I guess, through photography, by cutting through all that noise? Is it just, well, just pick something up and go out and do it until you figure it out?
Well, just whatever it is that you're curious about. Like if you already have chosen photography as your passion right now, then what are you curious about? Go and do that. Like, are you a person who's very interested in people? Okay, then go in your hometown, go photograph people. Maybe you can, my father just put out his latest photo book, and it is just portraits of people from his village.
Cool.
And because that's what he's interested in. He's deeply curious about people, and he lives in a small rural village with my mom, and he just has been walking around for 25 years taking pictures of everyone basically. And so that's what he's interested in. Maybe some people are more specific in their interests. Maybe in addition to wanting to do photography, maybe you're really passionate about horses and horse riding. Okay, take your camera, go to the horse riding place, and like take photos of the horses or of the people riding the horses. Whatever it is that you're curious and passionate about, I say that's the thing that you should go and do. And don't worry about, oh, that's already been done, because everything's been done. Don't worry about, yeah, but I'm not a quote unquote real photographer. It doesn't matter. No one ever really thinks that about you anyway. Don't worry about, is there money in this, or is there commercially interesting? Like, does anyone care about these photos? It doesn't matter. You care about this topic and you want to take photos. Go take the photos. That, and people will be into it, because if you're so passionate about it, and so curious, and so engaged with the topic, then it will be a better photo.
Yeah, it comes through in the photos, and it comes through in everything you present with it. It's almost like that, find what you love, follow what you love, and you'll end up knowing it, right? And it's that kind of that curiosity with a understanding or recognizing what you love or what you're interested in, but what you're really interested in. And they talk writing and acting and stand up and all of those kind of artistic pursuits. They say the same thing, like writing a screenplay. Start with what you love. You end up knowing it, and then you write what you know. Have you ever caught yourself drifting though? Like, I mean, if I look at these books that I have, and I've seen a lot of your work online. I mean, they're kind of different in aesthetics a little bit, but I would definitely say, you have the style's one thing, but you definitely have a voice. What would you kind of say that is? And have you ever had to kind of realign that or kind of check back in with yourself, say, oh, this is not me. I'm not actually interested in it. Why am I drifting? Have you ever had those kind of moments?
I think not so much with personal work, but I have had moments where I would take on client jobs um, I mean, sometimes I just had to for financial reasons, especially post COVID when I just had to take on whatever. But I take much better photos if I'm actually into the thing. And so there are types of photography that I'm not that into, but I have taken jobs for financial reasons to do it. And it's been pretty gratifying to slowly get out of that COVID hole and be able to remember, oh, yeah, I don't have to do this particular job because I actually don't like this kind of photography and I'm not very good at it. I can say no to this one. I can pass it on to a friend or colleague who does love that kind of photography, and it'll get better results for them as well. So for me, I could see it in the client work more so than the personal work. The personal work, I'm already only following my passion and my curiosity to the topic. So it's rare that I mean, I can't even think of a single example where I started on something that I was like, oh, I'm actually not that interested in this, because I'm only starting it because I'm interested in it.
How would you sum that up, though, in terms of what you are interested in and what type of work you want to produce? I know I'm not asking you to generalize, but if you give me
Yeah, yeah. I basically have two sides to my personal work. One is fine art, which is the examples are the books that you have there. Another thing is what I've started this year. I've started calling this um, community documentary projects. So I am deeply curious about people like my father. And I'm specifically curious not only in individuals, but in interesting communities and why they do what they do, what the community as a whole is like as one organism. And so my very first big project was I started it in 2013, and it took about a year and a half to make, and it was called One of Many. And for that project, again, there was no plan, but I was just following my curiosity. For that project, I went to 12 different cities in the United States that were not New York, LA, or San Francisco, which are, especially at the time, the perceived centers of culture. And I went to these 12 other kind of like, let's call them B cities. That's not really fair to call them that, but for the context of explaining this. And I went there to photograph the creative communities and basically say like, hey, what is the creative community like in let's say Savannah, Georgia, or Detroit, and why do you live here and not in New York? And again, for context, this is 2013-14 when, yeah, of course there was internet, but now you can kind of live anywhere, sort of, depending on what you do. But then it was still very much like if you want to get certain kinds of jobs, you kind of have to live in New York or LA. And so I was curious, oh, you live in these places. Why is that? And what do you do here? And what is the community like here? And so in these 12 cities, I did portraits of about 50 creatives per city. So that's about 600 people total. And that became this huge project. That was the first one I did of this kind. The most recent one I've done was this year in Amsterdam, where I was curious about a community that I myself am part of, which is the English language comedy community of Amsterdam. Not a city where English is the first language, right? And so it's very interesting because this community is huge, extremely good at what they do, and globally known, except here. So there are people that that trained here and lived here for years that are now huge stars like Seth Meyers, who has his own television show in the United States, his talk show, and he was for years the head writer of Saturday Night Live. Or Jordan Peele, who is now a famous director and of course was an amazing sketch comedian in Key and Peele. He lived here for a few years and got trained here. The TV show Ted Lasso, maybe people have heard of that one. The creators of that show created that character years ago in Amsterdam, and they lived here and they performed here and they learned the craft here. And so those are all people from the past who are huge, but there is currently an even bigger explosion of amazing talent from all over the world that just happens to live here. And I thought, well, what an interesting group of people to photograph. And so I photographed 101 of them across a 2-day massive monster studio session. And we made it into a zine. And we had a big launch show for it with performances. And we got into like the local newspaper, the local television programs. So the whole mission was to shine a light on this community and how special it is, but somehow under the radar locally. And so that's what I love doing, these documentary projects about communities. And so I'm now prepping for the next 2 or 3 for the coming year. And it's always about like numbers, like at least 100 people from a community. Like I like overdoing it. I like making projects where people think, oh boy, I couldn't even start to think to do that because it's so much work. But I really love that.
Amazing. And you mentioned comedy. You've taken up, well, I say taken up, I gather it's a relatively new thing, but unstaged improvised comedy. Tell us a little bit about that. What inspired it? Where did that come from? Has it always been a thing that you've wanted to do?
Not really. I was always into comedy, mostly stand-up comedy, and that's not what I do. I do improv comedy, improvised comedy. But I lived in New York for 20 years, and that's of course also a big city for comedy. And I moved to Amsterdam in the summer of 2020, COVID. So everything was closed. I really couldn't find much work. So I had a lot of time on my hands. And the only thing that wasn't closed was educational things. And so I signed up for an improv comedy taster class, as they call it. It's like a one-time 3 hours, and was completely taken by it. It works extremely well with my ADHD brain. I make a lot of very fast lateral connections that are just strange, and so that works on stage. And so I took this taster class, and then it got a little bit out of control, and I did like the 2 different full curriculums at the same time over the course of a year, and just like really embraced it and really love it. And I ended up getting cast on the house team of the biggest theater that's here in Amsterdam for English language improv comedy, and I was on that team for 4 or 5 seasons. And then in the meantime, that community has grown so much that now we have more theaters, and I perform with a few different groups a few times a week in different places, also in other countries, but mostly here.
Wow, fascinating. Has that how has that impacted your photography, if at all? I mean, they seem to be separate endeavors completely, but I know that you mentioned that, or I've seen some short films that you're doing. Is that part of kind of your creative side as well with the humor?
Yeah, it's actually helped photography a lot. Not so much on a technical level, but if you continuously get thrown on stage with zero preparation, and you're supposed to make something fun out of it, because that's what, for people who don't know what improv comedy is, you go on stage with a small group of people, let's say 4 or 5 people, and then you say hello to the audience, and then you ask the audience for a completely random suggestion. Some nights we might ask for a random object. Some nights we might ask for a location that fits on that stage that we're on. Some nights we might ask for a relationship like mother-daughter. And then they yell a bunch of stuff out. We pick one, the lights go out, the lights come up, and we start and do a 1-hour play based on that one-word suggestion. So there's no time for thinking. It's pure instinct and reacting and being totally in the moment and really listening to your fellow actors so that it feels true. And that's where the funny is, in the things that are true and honest. And so with that experience, it's very hard to get me perturbed on set as a photographer, because you throw something at me, I'm now used to immediately reacting and coming up with a solution, and I'm not I'm not nervous about it. So it's actually helped quite a bit in that sense.
And you're doing some type of short films in the same community, or is that separate?
Well, so this year I started doing. Every photographer wants to be a filmmaker, and every filmmaker wants to be a photographer, right? And so I've always wanted to make films, and now that I'm such a part of this community of actors, because most improvisers also might have a stand-up comedy side or an acting side. Now this year I started putting these worlds together, my photography world and my comedy world. And so I'm taking the opportunity to pull in all these wonderful talents and make these short films that are basically about an exaggerated version of me, like the photographer me, and little stories that happen around me, and we turn them into these little shorts, and that's been very fun. Today, actually, right after this, we're shooting the sixth and final episode of this season that I've been working on for this little project, and it's just been so much fun, and people are really responding to it. So that's even more gratifying. So it brings the photography and the comedy together, because I am me, an exaggerated version of me, and I am taking photos, but then there's all these weird things that happen.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that one day. Maybe next time I'm in Amsterdam, I'll give you a shout. Wesley, it's been an absolute pleasure. I know you've got to go and shoot this film as well, so I'll let you go. And I just want to thank you again for your time. I'll continue to be a Substack fan, a photographic fan, and maybe one day a comedy fan of yours. But until then, take good care of yourself. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.